5 seconds.
A very good morning to all of you, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this fabulous day 2, where we all gather together for unlocking the power of being one. And when I talk about unlocking the power of being one, day 1 has been absolutely splendid. We've had the most enlightening and illuminating discussions about what burnout is, how burnout can be prevented, what are the steps that can be taken in order to heal yourself and heal others by being more compassionate towards self acceptance and compatibility, flexibility, building resilience. And of course, today itself, during the day, we have a special one also coming on resilience. So there's a lot we are going to cover today. And it is my good fortune that we have the most excellent sponsors in our hearts that have opened their hearts for us. So let's have a huge round of applause for our platinum sponsors: Vakrangi, Gale India Limited, Indraprastha Gas Limited, IGL, Intas Pharmaceuticals, gold sponsors; Sham Steel, Sun Pharmaceuticals Industries Limited, silver sponsors: Cipla Limited, Lupin Limited, Torrent Pharmaceuticals, and technical partners, the ones who are getting everything done splendid and seamlessly, are Hums Events. With that being said, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to day 2. हमारे यहाँ पर जितने भी डॉक्टर्स, हेल्थ केयर प्रोफेशनल्स और मेडिकल प्रोफेशनल्स हैं, I'm guessing everybody is very socially active. So all you need to do is also hashtag unlocking the power of being, and do follow us on MHFI, and we've got AIMS, and of course we've got Mind Specialist, which is an online initiative of Rahat. So all these families are coming together to create this awareness of healing and the power of one. Now, when we talk about the power of being one, to get that oneness, you have to understand the things around you, the resources, and especially the substances. So when it comes to the substances and substance use, there is one illuminary that is going to enlighten us about that. She has been really spearheading the movement when it comes to substance use amongst medical students and their mental health. And today she's going to talk about that. So first and foremost, with a thunderous round of applause, let's invite Professor Anju Dhawan, Professor, National Drug Dependence Treatment Center, AIMS, New Delhi. And I would also like to invite the ever-smiling and very handsome Dr. Shobhit Jain, who is the Assistant Professor, Department of Psychiatry, Heritage Institute of Medical Sciences, Varanasi, to take this session forward. So Dr. Shobhit, over to you. Welcome, ma'am.
Thank you, sir. So first of all, a very good morning to all my audience. They are at AIMS New Delhi, at AIMS Varanasi, and our online participants. I am Dr. Shobhit Jain, Assistant Professor at Heritage Institute of Medical Sciences. Today I am moderating a very important session titled as Substance Abuse Among Medical Students and Their Mental Health. Friends, substance abuse is a common problem worldwide, and it usually starts at adolescence and young adulthood and often progress later throughout life. Hence, the students of various streams are affected with this problem. And in our day-to-day life, we often come across medical students suffering with substance use disorder despite knowing about its health hazards. Consequences of substance use is not just limited to its physical health problem, but it also deeply affects one's psychological health. And often these group of students face social problems like interpersonal altercation, compromised academic performance, disciplinary and legal actions, and sometimes substance use is also associated with suicide. So today we have with us Professor Anju Dhawan ma'am as an eminent speaker to enlighten us more about this topic. Professor Dhawan ma'am is among one of the senior most faculty members of the Apex Medical Institution of our country, that is AIMS New Delhi. She is also the director of National Drug Dependence Treatment Center located at Ghaziabad. She is a member of several national and international bodies like WHO Expert Committee on Development of Treatment Guidelines for Management of Drug Use in Pregnant Women, WHO Expert Committee on Drug Use and Tuberculosis, and International Society of Addiction Medicine Education and Training Committee. Her research interests include adolescent and women substance abuse and also the meditation. She has a long list of more than 130 publications. Among her long list of achievements, she was awarded with the prestigious Fogarty International Training and Research Fellowship for HIV and AIDS by University of California, Los Angeles in year 2004. So friends, please welcome Professor Anju Dhawan ma'am with a big applause.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shobit. It's a pleasure to make this presentation in a session that is moderated by Dr. Shobit, and it's very good to meet you again. A small correction, I'm in charge of the Adolescent Drug Abuse Treatment Clinic at NDDTC, and the chief is Professor Rakesh Chadha. Let me just start with making the presentation now. Now, if we talk about substance use among medical students and their mental health, I would like to start with this presentation by a few case vignettes. So we have been seeing some students coming forward for help for substance use related issues at AIIMS as well. So this is one such vignette. I have just tried to not go into the background characteristics so that the student is not identifiable. So student comes with large amounts of alcohol use with increasing frequency to several days per week, and initially usually in parties, but sometimes also alone. The substance use increase is associated with the reversal of sleep-wake cycle, missing of classes, missing exams, and even exam failures. The peer group gradually becomes limited largely to other students with similar substance use pattern. And this spiraling down pattern is associated not only with academic decline, but with social stigma and being labeled as a person who's addicted to substances. Another case, student with history of occasional tramadol use has also experimented with injecting fentanyl, which is a very, very hazardous substance on a few occasions, thus with a serious risk of overdose. Substance use in another student with history of cannabis use, associated sometimes with self-harm, usually in response to emotionally difficult situations. So these students who come forward for help may be males or females. Now coming to the topic, why is it so important to talk about substance use? Like the chairperson has already highlighted, this is the age group when usually substance use starts. In early adulthood or still earlier in adolescence. And medical students are in this age group. They join medical college at about 18 years of age. It is also a time when many of them are leaving home for the first time and getting independence. So sometimes people tend to experiment because of that independence and so-called freedom that they have. It is also a very important period of life because it lays the foundation of future professional, personal, and social life. So whatever we achieve at this period of our life in terms of professional achievement, that is the basic foundation based on which we further do our post-graduation and develop other further professional skills. It's also a time when we learn to develop personal relationships and social skills. Social relationships get further refined during this period. The treatment of patients with these problems, if a person has themselves got affected by substance use, it may influence their judgment when they're treating other patients who have similar experiences. So I think there is no doubt that it's a very important issue. Now, how common is it? This is a review of studies on substance use amongst medical students that included studies conducted over 25 years, and about 94 articles were included. These studies were mostly from Europe and America, but there were also few studies from Asia. It showed that alcohol use is the most common. And when I say alcohol use, it is not just restricted to use. Risky or harmful alcohol use in terms of binge drinking, heavy amounts of alcohol consumption that is associated with consequences in terms of harmful, risky behaviors occurs in about 1/4 students at some point of time. Tobacco use, mostly by smoking route, occurred in about 1/6 of the students. Lifetime cannabis use was very high, occurring in 1/3, but about 10% of the students also reported current use. Rest of them did not use in the last recent past. Sedative use was more variable across studies, with rates varying from 10 to 25%. Other substances that were seen in these studies were relatively less common. Stimulants, hallucinogens, and opioid use was almost nil in most countries, fortunately. Now, this review was conducted in 2013, but the more recent review by Candido et al. Has also shown similar findings. Now, how does this use compare to other populations? Is it that medical students are using more than others, or is it that they're using less? Let's look at that information. What has been seen is that tobacco use is lower than university students, probably because of some kind of awareness about hazards of tobacco use, and it's also lower than the general population use usually. Alcohol use is similar to other university students, but higher than general population, and it is known that young people tend to use alcohol in more risky manner, more harmful manner in terms of the acute consequences of alcohol consumption. The unprescribed use of pharmaceuticals, particularly stimulants, which people sometimes use to keep awake, and sedatives are higher than in the general population, and these substances have been related to examination stress, associated more with examinations. Now, what does data from within India say? There have been studies conducted this is a multi-center study in 8 medical colleges of India. There's another study among undergraduate students in Mumbai, another one from Lucknow. And as you can see, the rates are quite variable. The rates in this first study, Goel et al., it is higher in postgraduates and undergraduates. Most of the studies are focused on tobacco and alcohol use, but use of cannabis has also been reported. So, a more recent review by one of our AIIMS alumni, who's now faculty at another institution, has shown that the magnitude of substance use, they looked at a recent review, and 39 studies were there among medical undergraduates from India. It also showed that alcohol use, tobacco use, and cannabis use were the common substances. And as you can see, there is a huge variability across institutions in terms of the prevalence. One unfortunate trend is that females were also reporting increasing trend of substance use, including alcohol and smoking, and sedative use that has been shown across studies is higher amongst females than amongst males. The associated factors in this review that emerged from undergraduates in India were family history, peer pressure, transition period from school to college, and progression in the medical course, indicating that once they go to higher classes from the first year to the second year to the third year to the fourth year, the prevalence tends to increase. So at AIIMS, about 15 students have sought help so far. They're mostly undergraduates, also some postgraduates, and self or peer referral. They usually come either themselves or through friends. The common substances that we have seen in the treatment setting are cannabis, alcohol, prescription opioids. Of course, the severity varies from occasional use to those reporting much more continued use, and progression to substance use disorder in terms of harmful use, dependence, and also consequences in terms of self-injury, health damage, psychological consequences, depression, anxiety, psychosis, and academic decline. And sometimes these students have needed admission due to complications and inpatient stay. So if we look at the risk and protective factors, what have emerged from literature for substance use amongst medical students, it is more in males than females, except sedative use. Studies have shown that it increases with the number of years in college. The associated factors are usually academic stress, isolation, sedentary lifestyle, high interpersonal sensitivity. Prior substance use while the student was in school is a risk factor. And sometimes social media also increases the peer pressure. Because of that, they have more information available in terms of peer substance use. Living with the family, that means those who are not hostelers, they're staying at home. Or there is disapproval of substance use. The student himself believes this is not good, I should not be doing it, it is not something nice. Being involved in religion or spiritual pursuits, these act as protective factors. The reasons when students are asked, why is it that you're using? The usual reasons reported are very similar to other populations in which substances are used, that is curiosity, celebration, etc. But in addition, there are reasons reported related to stress, which may be academic stress. It may be broken relationships, because this is also a period of life when one gets into relationships with the opposite gender. And family issues sometimes also contribute to the stress. More than 70% of students gave one of these three reasons. Now, like I've discussed already, the impact in terms of student wellness, it includes progression from use to harmful use to dependence in some individuals. In terms of academics, the student may miss classes. It may be associated with poor academic performance, withdrawal from routine activities besides academics, other activities, practicals, coursework, other recreational pursuits, and increased possibility of course dropout. Additionally, there may be psychiatric comorbidities, as already discussed. Of course, it affects the relationships with peers. Those who are not substance users tend to avoid the person who's using substances. Affects relationship with parents. And in terms of acute complications, it has been seen, for instance, that with binge alcohol use, there is risk of getting into fights, there is risk of getting into injuries, self-harm. Sometimes instances of overdose may occur with some of the substances, risky behaviors such as driving under influence, and sometimes even unsafe sexual behavior or even unwanted sexual advances, which may get them into serious trouble. There may be risk of medical problems, and chronic long-term complications may sometimes emerge later and not during the initial training years, but later on in life. In a multi-centered study of university students from UK, it was reported that 10% of students who used drugs or alcohol had got involved in some way with substance-related crime. For instance, even purchasing illicit substances is a criminal activity as per the law. Associated factors that emerged from this in terms of criminal involvement were those who were going out to socialize, frequent use of nightclubs, etc. So not only is the student himself at risk, sometimes there is an impact on peers in terms of unintended injuries that may occur or discomfort to bystanders. So somebody who's using substances may create a public nuisance as well. Now, in terms of assessment, like I said earlier, student may come himself, or sometimes when the peers are aware, they may refer the person or encourage the person to come forward and seek help. At AIIMS, they usually come either to the student wellness counselors or they approach the psychiatry OPD or one of the consultants from the Department of Psychiatry. But for this kind of sensitive information to come, the student must feel comfortable to disclose. And for that, it is very important that there should be assurance about confidentiality. So that means that he should have this kind of confidence that whatever I am discussing will not be disclosed either to the college authorities or to the parents. However, confidentiality may need to be breached, whereas there is a serious risk of self-harm, for instance, risk of suicide or harm to others. And this kind of information needs to be told to the student beforehand, that what are the caveats to breach of confidentiality. Now, the assessment, like in any case of substance use, includes assessing the duration of use, the frequency of use, the quantity of all substances used, the progression that has occurred over time, exploring the criteria for diagnosis of harmful use in terms of physical or psychological harm, exploring the criteria for dependence in terms of how it has impacted the life of the individual, if there are withdrawals, tolerance, if there is lack of control, craving. So, and also assessment of complications in various spheres, which I've already discussed, the kind of spheres which get affected. The abstinence attempts if the person has tried to stop on their own, what is the level of motivation for stopping the substance use, and associated physical and psychiatric comorbidity. It's also important to go into the family history so that one has a clear relationship about the family context which the person comes from, the relationship with various family members, and if there are major family problems such as conflicts. Also, history of substance use in the family becomes very important. The personal history in terms of academic performance prior to onset of substance use, relationships. The premorbid personality here is very important. It may have an important role to play in terms of both contributing to the risk of initiation of substance use. It may have contributed to the progression, to the maintenance of substance use, and it's an important prognostic factor for planning the management. So one must look into what kind of traits, if there are any impulsivity, novelty seeking, other traits of where the person doesn't go by the social norms and rules, or even cluster C traits such as avoidant or other kind of cluster C traits. Now the intervention, of course, it has to be based on assessment because one shoe doesn't fit all. The students come forward for use of different kinds of substances and intervention has to be accordingly planned. For instance, a person who's just used substance on 2 or 3 occasions has to be managed on a very different line from somebody who's using heavy amounts of substances in a daily use and has already experienced several complications due to substance use. The first and foremost, I would say, is it's important to engage the person in treatment. So the student must feel confident and comfortable to come back again and again to the therapist so that the treatment can be continued can be done in a continuous manner. And we must remember here that, sometimes here we are playing a dual role. We are also teachers, we are also clinicians. So the same student in a class would be your student, but here he has come as a patient seeking help and you are the person who's a service provider, the treating physician. So it's important to engage the student in the treatment process in a very non-judgmental approach. So goals have to be formulated along with the student who is here, the patient. So for instance, he may not be absolutely ready or comfortable to stop all substances simultaneously, may not have kept cessation of substance use as a goal, or may have kept just reduction of substance use as a goal, or he may be just coming because of other issues and may not have yet thought about his reducing or stopping his substance use. And the goals cannot be imposed upon the patient. They have to be, along with the student here, they have to be formulated together by the treating physician, the treating psychiatrist. It's important to address the issues that are most urgent to the student here For instance, if his academic issues are important or he's got into some kind of difficulties, then those would need to be addressed first and then take up the other issues one by one. The follow-up duration has to be long, depending on the severity. If it is a very occasional use, then maybe just a few sessions may suffice. The intervention, like in any case of substance use, includes motivation enhancement and subsequently relapse prevention sessions. And pharmacological treatment has to be provided when indicated, depending on the nature of substances used and its severity. So here it would be treatment of withdrawal symptoms, long-term pharmacotherapy to prevent relapse, addressing any physical problems, psychiatric disorders. If he has associated depression, anxiety, psychosis, they may need to be treated. And sometimes even treatment for associated personality disorders, which may benefit from a mood stabilizer or other medication where if there is too much aggression, irritability, anger. Now, this is a standard approach to treatment with some issues that I try to highlight about the student per se, because here this setting is different. The student is coming forward for help. He himself is a trainee in a medical institution, and the person providing the treatment is also part of the same system. So besides at an individual level, what are the systemic solutions that can be there for prevention and management of substance use amongst medical students? Let's look at the literature related to that and what can be done. So it's important to design campus-based prevention and intervention strategies. These need to be holistic, they need to be multimodal, and it's important that all key stakeholders participate in this, which would include the students, the administration, etc. And a policy and action plan document is required first, because that would provide a framework within which the solutions or the strategies can be devised. And many universities abroad have such documents in place. These are some examples of alcohol and drug problems on campus policies. One well-known such campus-wide initiative is the STEPS program. I thought I will cite this here. For those who are interested, they can go back and have a more detailed look at it, by the University of Albany, which is a multimodal intervention, and evidence-based strategies are used to reduce the substance use related problems in the campus. It has been widely replicated. At AIMS, we developed a policy and action plan on prevention and intervention for substance use in students, and the document has been submitted to the AIMS administration last year. This was formulated with the participation of all key stakeholders, including the student bodies. The key stakeholders in our initiative included the academic section, the hostel section, the student bodies, the student wellness, the Department of Psychiatry, who are the treatment providers here. The objectives of the document were to provide a safe, healthy, working and learning environment for all students, to prevent substance abuse in the campus, to facilitate early treatment seeking for substance use problems for those who are already affected, and to manage these cases of problematic substance use with sensitivity and discretion. So the focus was on substance use that is leading to problems in terms of either physical, psychological, social, legal, academic difficulties. The approach included both demand reduction and supply reduction, as is the standard kind of strategy across the world when the campus-based interventions are formulated. So when we say demand reduction here, we mean prevention and treatment, and supply reduction indicating reduced availability. Now, if we look at strategies, it includes primary prevention. That means intervention for all. So you can see the base of this intervention is broad, and it is largely with the purpose of prevention. So it would mean overall environmental issues need to be addressed, creating an overall conducive drug-free environment, creating more awareness, bringing about a change in attitude. For instance, sometimes if the seniors are using, the student may think it's okay. After all, my senior is using it, so there is no problem associated with it. Developing skills to say no. In today's world, very often if a person wants to abstain, for instance, from alcohol, and there are parties where alcohol is being served, the student may find it difficult or awkward to say, no, I don't drink. So there should be the skill to say no, and an associated, sense of pride that I'm aware about my health, I am concerned about my health, and I'm comfortable saying no, this is my choice. Treating the underlying conditions, and not only that, reducing the availability or supply. Now, for a smaller number, those who are using substances, early intervention would be required. And for those who have gone on to more continued use, more severe use, more intensive treatment may need to be given, but these tend to be, fortunately, a smaller minority. So the overall strategies include, besides supportive environment, promoting social and recreational options, stress reduction measures, which can be of different kinds. It could include psychological strategies, holding workshops, teaching coping skills. It could mean yoga and meditation-based interventions, environment that supports health-promoting norms, strategies that enhance engagement with academics. So when I say environment that supports health-promoting norms, I mean that students, overall, if they are more aware of their health, participate in activities like there are these days marathons and yogathons and cyclothons which are conducted, or other sports activities, strategies that enhance engagement with academics, the increased knowledge, change attitude and skills as far as substance use is concerned, involvement of peers. So peers being aware so that they can identify early signs amongst their peers if someone is using substances, treatment of underlying psychiatric conditions, because psychiatric conditions have a two-way relationship. They may predispose to substance use, and they may also get aggravated by substance use, and they may be a consequence of substance use. Not only that, they can affect the course and treatment of substance use. So it's important to treat them and limit the supply and availability overall. So the awareness activities should be devised with the involvement of student bodies. It's good if they are in the students' own voices. For example, students' magazines, students' journals. It could be through various mediums. Students could write stories, they could write poetry, and other students can understand and relate to it. The messages reinforcing the harms due to substance use need to come from multiple sources. So there could be, for instance, posters and awareness lectures, etc. Training of peers to organize informational sessions in an interactive format is a good approach. At AIIMS, we have conducted this half-day symposium on substance use. We do it annually, and a subsession on substance use in orientation for undergraduates and postgraduates is conducted. The student bodies are also being encouraged to take up these issues through various forums. When we talk of supply reduction efforts, the rules need to be publicized so that the students are very clearly aware at the time of entry. So many, for instance, what are the rules as far as use of substances in the campus are concerned, and also the overall rules in the country, what are the prevailing laws. For instance, cannabis being an illegal substance, many times students are, although these days media has highlighted it so much, but the campus is also a place which is part of the larger, where the framework of law of the country overall holds true. And that is something that needs to be reinforced. So the aim of these supply reduction efforts is to provide a safe environment, and the threshold for intervening should be such that more serious problems can be averted. And people have also used periodic checks in hostels as one of the measures. Any aberration needs to be addressed through consistent and graded disciplinary action, where the aim should be more to act as a deterrent and change the overall norms over time rather than to be punitive. It should also be such that it does not create unnecessary anxiety among students, because they're already living in a highly stressful environment. So the spectrum of punishment should grade from fines, adverse entry into academic files, restriction from entry into hostels or mess, suspension from academic programs, and action as per laws. This is what is being reported in literature. Now, when we talk of the referrals, like I said, besides referrals coming from other students, for which student orientations help so that they are able to identify. Self-screening is another method that has been used. So self-screening using instruments such as the WHO Assist can be used by students to understand their severity of or whether they are suffering from problematic substance use. So WHO Assist grades substance use as low risk, moderate risk, and high risk. The workshops can be conducted specifically for student volunteers, and hostel and faculty also need to be aware so that they could provide referrals for when they are in doubt about a person using substances. And even seeking help could be linked to with prevention of disciplinary action in order to encourage help seeking. The interventions that are used could be screening and brief intervention for those with low intensity of use. For instance, this is what is done at the entry level when a person comes forward for help. And screening brief intervention is an evidence-based mechanism. Just a few sessions, 2 or 3 sessions may also have been shown to be beneficial. And it is linked to increased service utilization for college students for substance use related issues. And this has been studied. Now, for more severe substance use, a referral to the psychiatrist or psychologist is required. The screening and brief intervention could even be carried out by the student wellness if such a wing exists in the institution, because this is something where people can easily be trained to provide this intervention. Now, another example of brief alcohol screening and intervention of college students is this basics.
I guess, Professor Anju? Ladies and gentlemen, there seems to be a little bit of connection problem at the professor's end. So I hope she's reconnecting with that. Dr. Shobit, would you like to expand on what ma'am has been sharing about substance use?
Yes, actually there are several reasons for which the students often start the substance abuse, which ma'am has very well enlightened. Sometimes due to recreational activities, we pass in the exam, we create a celebration parties, always there is a substance use, alcohol or any substance use is most of the time preferred during these recreational activities, and that is the beginning.
Sir, do you think when we talk about substance use with the social media, especially when some people are trying to make drugs very cool, unfortunately in some sitcoms, when you've got online streaming, you've got social media where when it comes to drinking and all, some people actually very proudly represent it. And the way they make it so cool that it becomes a part of the problem itself. That I guess Professor Dhawan is back. Welcome, ma'am.
Welcome, ma'am. Please.
Yeah, sorry, there was a electricity failure, and I'm
no worries, ma'am. No worries.
Using my mobile.
No worries.
I think I was on this, right?
I think so, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Yes. So when I was talking about data on prevalence to correct norms, so many times people tend to, they tend to believe that substance use is more common than it actually is. Because of that poses a risk, because generally people tend to do things which everybody else is doing, and especially true for young people. So data to correct norms helps people to understand that substance use is actually not that common as they thought. And a menu of options helps the student to then to decide what kind of treatment option they would like to show. And this program has been seen to be effective at 1 year follow-up. So to conclude, overall, more multimodal interventions are required. Involving multiple stakeholders at the level of the institution is important. There are many evidence-based interventions for this age group, but limited literature on evidence specific to medical students. So you saw that I just quoted a few studies as in terms of evidence. A multidimensional prevention approach helps in terms of health promotion, developing skills. Early identification and management is important as far as the intervention is concerned, and more intensive treatment for those who have gone on to more severe substance use. Thank you very much. Dr. Shobit, you're muted, I think.
Sorry, I have not unmuted myself. So thank you, ma'am, for delivering such an insightful lecture on this topic. Now I would invite our audience for any question and queries on this topic. First, I am having questions from the online participants. There is one question: can spiritual yoga and meditation practice help in primary prevention and early intervention in substance use?
So religion and spirituality, like I said, works as a protective factor. That has been seen quite consistently. And involvement in yoga, doing meditation, etc., is also works as a protective factor, largely due to this reason. It also, the effect of yoga on well-being, developing emotional resilience, handling stress, that has been well documented across literature. So definitely it is a method that can be used for those who are interested. Unmute yourself.
Yoga-based program among the medical students. How can this be addressed?
Can you repeat the question, please?
There is less acceptance of meditation and yoga-based programs among medical students. How can this be addressed?
I think it can be addressed, number one, by awareness about the scientific literature that is related to yoga and meditation. So things have changed. 10 years back, 15 years back, there was not so much literature on effectiveness of yoga meditation as a well-being strategy, as a stress reduction strategy, as a mental health protective strategy. But now more and more literature is available. So if that kind of literature is shared with students and they understand that it contributes to mental health, the acceptance is likely to be more, because these are medical students. They have a scientific mind. They want to understand things logically and then accept them. So if we provide that kind of evidence base that it is there and they are able to look at it from that perspective, then if there is any inherent bias or, then that would probably not be there. But I think that more and more young people are now coming forward to practice yoga and meditation. The acceptance overall has increased quite a lot. A lot of young people are practicing, including students in professional colleges.
And often this substance abuse is taken as a recreation in all the parties, and many times these medical students approach me and they say, how much use can we do, or even one use for the recreational purpose, can we do it or not? Many times these alcohol and tobacco smoking, legal drugs. These are often promoted by the students.
Yeah.
So
let me, yeah, sorry.
Yes, ma'am. For this, how can we prevent and how much use can we promote this?
So as far as tobacco is concerned, tobacco is a highly addictive substance. So even experimentation with tobacco use increases the risk of continued use very significantly. So it is, in fact, people have compared tobacco to heroin and cocaine in terms of its addictive potential. That means people who use it once, what are the chances of their continued use? That is very high. And as medical students, we see the health hazards of tobacco across various medical wards. You know, when I was a medical student, when we used to visit wards and see so much health consequences, I used to wonder, this is a legal substance and it has so many health hazards. And I'm sure many students come up with this kind of question in their mind, you know. So awareness itself should provide that knowledge base so that one would not experiment with it. As far as alcohol is concerned, it is gaining more and more social acceptance. Now, there are two things which are important to remember for alcohol. One is that the later the age of onset, the better it is, because those who develop problematic use dependence, it is very difficult to predict that who will go on to excessive, amongst those who use alcohol regularly, who will go on to dependent use. So later, what has been seen that delaying the age of onset reduces the risk of dependence. So, and initially the early 20s is also a period of life when the brain is still developing. What has been seen that when young people use alcohol, their brain circuits which are related to executive control, decision making are yet not developed, while the limbic system develops earlier. So the emotional aspects, those aspects, the reward circuits are still quite active. So because of that, there may be an impairment of judgment. So that is why it is advised. Now, what is the time that it takes for the brain to mature? So usually people say that by about mid-20s, 25 or so, the brain matures fully. So it is better to delay the onset. That is one thing. Second thing, what does WHO say about alcohol use, risky alcohol use? WHO says the less the better, you know. So there is no safe drinking kind of concept which they have given that, okay, you can drink so much, it is safe. So they say the less the better. So if you have decided not to use, very good. If you have decided to use, delay the use as much as possible. When you use as less as possible. These are some of the important things to keep in mind, because young people, when they drink alcohol, many times they tend to drink in binge patterns. So person may say, "Main to kabhi kabhi peeta hu, I just drank once in a party." But if he took 5 pegs of alcohol in a party, that increases the risk, which I talked about, the acute consequences, injuries and accidents, getting into fights, all those risks increase.
So thank you, ma'am. So first, not to use, and if you are willing to use as much less as possible. This is what ma'am has conveyed us. Now the second, another question: how to approach someone who is not comfortable opening up about their mental health problems?
Yeah, that is, I think it involves building of trust. As all psychiatrists, we have seen that patients sometimes may not come forward immediately with their issues. They may, so one is an overall environment where there is comfort approaching psychiatrists and psychologists. So we reach out, the information is spread that you can come forward for help, we are available, you know, there will be no negative consequences of help seeking. So once there is that environment of comfort, and over time also that environment develops. For instance, one student comes forward, then more start coming forward. For instance, at AIIMS, I would like to give the credit to Professor Pratap Sharan here, who started the student wellness and has done tremendous work in this area. So because of his commitment, a lot of students started coming forward for help. And once they started coming forward for help, more and more students by word of mouth started coming forward. So over a few years, the student wellness has built quite a lot, and students initially they would come forward more for mental health issues. Now students are also coming forward for substance use related issues over time. And in a given case, when we are talking to a particular person, then that element of trust, confidentiality, building comfort, all those also help.
And there is another question. Do you have a yoga and meditation based program for students at your institute?
At Wellness, lots of student clubs during the lockdown period. These were started to involve students in social recreational options. Like I mentioned, that it also works as a good preventive mental health and substance use strategy. And also students were at that time facing immense stress, thinking about how to handle that stress. So there were a variety of hobby clubs that were started, from yoga and meditation was one of these clubs. So it ranged from photography to debates to chess playing to music, dance, cooking, etc. And yoga and meditation was also one of the clubs that was started for the students, and we had regular activities through the last year where students would join and participate.
And another question from our online participant is, what is the relation between cannabis use and mental health? How it adversely affects it?
Cannabis has been known that it increases the risk of psychosis in those who are predisposed. So that means that those who already have predisposition, psychosis may get precipitated. That is one aspect. In various substance uses, you see comorbid anxiety and depressive disorder. Some of it may be substance induced. The person abstains from substances, it may improve on its own as well. And some may warrant separate treatment. Users know that there may be panic attacks which may occur related to cannabis use.
So I think again the line is disrupted.
Dr. Shobhit, we have Dr. Anju has dropped off again.
Yeah. So can our, is there any questions from here at our M students? You have any questions? Can you pass, or you would like to ask directly from the ma'am, or you want to pass this question? You come here, please sit, and you can ask also.
I would like to ask one question from the students, that do they think substance use is a problem and something should be done about it?
Okay, one online participant has asked one important question, that cannabis use have been legalized in many countries and medical use is also advocated. So why we say that cannabis should not be used then?
See, currently cannabis in our country is an illegal substance. The cannabis debate is a whole long topic in itself, and one can go on about discussing it for an hour. But currently it is an illegal substance in the country. If you consume it, if you're found possessing it, it exposes you to risk of legal repercussions. And we are seeing that in the media and other places, right? That itself is a reason enough for non-use, I think.
Here is one of our audience at HIMSS. He want to ask one question. You please.
Yes, please.
Good morning, ma'am. Ma'am, certain countries have already established the use of recreational drugs. What are the arguments that they all agreed upon, considering they are aware of all the negative impact that it has?
No, what is your question?
What were the arguments that they all agreed upon, considering the fact that they are all aware of the negative impact that it has? The argument that they were all thinking about.
Means what arguments?
Yeah. So one,
you can brief your question. What you are asking, I think it is not clear.
I can try to answer that, Dr. Shobit. I'll just try to answer it.
Okay.
So, in countries which have legalized cannabis, for instance, one argument is related to decriminalization, that when people are criminalized, we are unnecessarily exposing them to negative consequences of criminalization. A young person who's criminalized, gets arrested, he may get exposed to other criminal activities, or obviously it affects his personal life in many ways. So it is, and the cost to the law enforcement agency, etc. So one argument is related to the criminalization aspects. And so that goes, so people say in favor of decriminalization. There are a lot of positive consequences of decriminalization that people have talked about. The second argument that is related is that when we legalize, does it lead to increase in substance use or does it not? That data is still a little more ambivalent, because when we talk of increase in substance use, the risk of increase is more in young people. But some studies have shown no increase, others have shown some increase. So that is the other argument, that really substance use doesn't increase when you make it available or legalize it. So two major kinds of arguments. But currently in our country, it is an illegal substance.
Okay. Is there any other question from anybody else? If there is any question, any last question from any of our audience? So I think there is no more question, ma'am. So thank you once again. I am thankful to Professor Anju Dhawan ma'am for giving us a wonderful lecture on this important topic. I am also very thankful to all my audience at New Delhi, at HIMSS Varanasi, and all my online viewers for their patient listening. Also, and at last but not the least, I am very thankful to Professor Nand Kumar sir, Ms. Aditi ji, and Mental Health Foundation India team for organizing this wonderful event. I also thank Professor Kotastani sir, Principal HIMSS Varanasi, for broadcasting this session live at his institute. Once again, thank you everybody, and wish you all a very happy World Mental Health Day.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shobit. And I would also like to thank Professor Nand Kumar and the organizers for this program. Thank you very much.